difficulties that they now face.
Leave us sought to table those documents. Is there any objection? There is objection in that case. There is objection in that last case. Question number 9, Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Mr. Speaker. To the Minister for Climate Change Issues, did New Zealand meet the 28 February deadline for its submission to the United Nations on increasing the level of ambition in global greenhouse gas mitigation, as agreed by parties in the Durban Platform for Enhanced Action? If not, why not?
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the agreement in Durban was for an invitation for the 195 member countries to submit views on options for increasing ambition globally for reducing emissions and did not amount to a deadline. I note that only 3 submissions were received by the 28th of February. New Zealand will be contributing its views this month, and that will be in good time for the next round of international negotiations to take place in Bonn in May.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Given that it was, according to the Minister, agreed, an invitation, but that paragraph 8 said submit by 28 February, is he concerned that ignoring the 28 February request and invitation, this government conveys the message that New Zealand doesn't care about the imminence and magnitude of climate change?
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Well, Mr. Speaker, quite clearly, with the fact that only 3 submissions were received by the 28th of February of the 195 countries that were representing Durban, hardly suggests that those countries thought it was the rigid deadline in the way in which the member presents it. I can absolutely assure the member that this government takes those international negotiations very seriously, and I have to say that this House should be very proud of the contribution that the Minister responsible for those international negotiations, Tim Grosser, is playing a very pivotal role, and this country is punching well above its weight in ensuring progress is made.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Setting aside what our weight is, has the Cabinet been informed of the recent UNEP report that, to have a likely chance of staying within the 2-degree Celsius threshold, global emissions in 2020 will need to be 12 gigatons below the projected level of 56?
The Honourable Dr.
Mr.
Nick Smith.
Speaker, certainly myself and my colleague, the Minister for International Negotiations, has received many of those reports. Cabinet is currently giving consideration both to the issues that flow from Bonn, as well as amendments that we'll need to make to the emissions trading scheme. I'd also point out that New Zealand is going to comfortably meet its Kyoto obligations around emissions, and that is something that was not the case prior to us putting the emissions trading scheme in place.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr.
Interpreting the answer to be no, I seek leave to table the UNEP report, the emissions gap report of 2011 by United Nations.
Leave us sought to table that document. Is there any objection? Any objection? There is no objection.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Given that the United Nations Secretary-General has told the Security Council that, quote, climate change not only exacerbates threats to international peace and security, it is a threat to international peace and security, minimalist steps will not do, quote, does he agree that bigger reductions by New Zealand than currently announced are essential?
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, certainly we have made a commitment in the negotiations to a target of between a 10 and 20% reduction on our 1990 emissions, subject to a number of conditions, some of which progress was made in the latest negotiations in Durban. What this government will not do is to make big, bold promise about emissions reductions like the previous government and let emissions continue to grow up uncontrolled. That does nothing for the credibility of dealing with this very serious issue.
Dr. Kennedy Graham.
In light of the heightened concern over the mitigation gap, will the government now accept the Secretary-General's earlier call for 30 to 40% cut for 2020 in recognition that that is not too big and bold?
The Honourable Dr. Nick
Speaker,
Smith.
I have seen no credible plan that would enable New Zealand by 2020 to reduce its emissions to 30 to 40% below 1990 levels. And remember, 1990 levels since then grew very substantially under the later years without completely decimating the New Zealand economy. And New Zealand government here is not going to do that.
Point of order, sir.
Point of order, Dr. Kennedy-Graham.
I seek leave to table the Green Party's document dated August 2009, Getting There, which conveyed a credible plan to getting to 40% cuts.
Order. This document's already available to all members. We won't waste time doing that. Supplementary question, Dr. Kennedy-Graham.
Recognising the comment by the Alliance of Small Island States, which did manage to get its submission to the United Nations, and I quote, "Enhancing mitigation ambition is essential in order to minimise adverse and potentially catastrophic effects for all countries, and is particularly critical to preserving the viability and survival of small developing island states. Does the government believe its current pledge will avert such a catastrophe and ensure their survival?"
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, there is a critical issue for those small island states, and New Zealand recognises that, and that was a subject of significant discussion at the Pacific Island Forum that we chaired in Auckland last year. But I'd remind the member that New Zealand's portion of greenhouse gas emissions globally is 0.2%. And if anybody in this House thinks that New Zealand by itself can solve this problem is, in my view, very misled. And what's more, I would say, New Zealand is making more progress than most in changing our emissions profile.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr. Kennedy-Graham.
I seek leave, sir, to table the submission by the Republic of Nauru on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, pointing out the degree of their concern on this matter.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Question number 10, Darian Fenton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Labour. Does she stand by her